The Borg have a number of distinct and unique technologies at their disposal, from regenerative nanites that can repair entire superstructures to centuries worth of different species' arsenals. But one technology that Starfleet has its eye on is the Borg transwarp capabilities. Following slipstream drive and coaxial warp, we're going to look at the potential for Starfleet and the Federation to replicate this faster-than-light method of travel. Hi, Rick here, and first off, let's look at what Borg transwarp is. An important distinction to make is that this is a very different technology than the Great Experiment in Transwarp performed by Starfleet in the late 23rd century. In fact, transwarp as a term is usually applied to any form of propulsion that exceeds warp speeds while remaining below the theoretical warp barrier of 10. Honestly, this terminology needs to be adopted and officialised by Starfleet in my opinion, as the warp scale is going to get increasingly crowded after the warp 9 mark, as the increase is exponential in nature, with 9.5 being at least twice the speed of 9 and 9.7 being multitudes faster still. So let's just call any speeds after a certain point transwarp, and introduce a new scale so that people don't have to start saying engage at warp 9.999999975.9. Wow, okay, just over a minute in and we're already derailed. Back on topic. The most experience with the Borg transwarp comes from the USS Voyager during its extensive encounters with them in their home territory of the Delta Quadrant, where they are able to get detailed looks at the technology and even manage to steal some elements of it for their own use, plus 7 of 9's extensive knowledge of the apparatus. Unlike slipstream drive or standard warp, the transwarp used by the Borg required the inclusion of extra elements external from the starship. A network of artificial subspace corridors have to be created and maintained in order to utilise a Borg transwarp drive. This network of energy conduits spans throughout much of the Delta Quadrant and even has branches all the way to the other quadrants. The routes are immersed in subspace and therefore undetectable by standard means, being a realm apart from the normal spacetime. The corridors themselves are maintained by interspatial manifolds that direct the corridors and prevent them from collapsing. Intelligence gathered indicates that the corridors have at least 6 focused hubs that act as control centres for the network and as a nexus for Borg ships. The vessels themselves, alongside standard warp capabilities, are connected to this network via several internal transwarp coils, and the ability to open a subspace rift into which the ship would traverse. Once inside the network, a ship rode through the energy conduits at exceptional speeds relative to normal space, and then could exit the corridor light years away. The method used to create the corridors in the first place is a subject of much speculation from Starfleet, with the study of several subspace phenomena to further their understanding. Attempts to create a corridor apart from the network have failed and resulted in a near-catastrophic warp core breach, showing that while the understanding of these corridors may be improving, Starfleet tech is still behind in making it a reality. Further proof of this can be seen when the USS Voyager manages to obtain a single transwarp coil and integrate it first with the Delta Flyer and then with Voyager itself. They managed to get it working without incident both times, hitchhiking the Borg's network several times and cutting 15 years off their journey home. The coil eventually burnt out, as this may be due to Starfleet's inferior knowledge of how to maintain such a device, and I'd suggest the power load was too much for a single coil to bear, hence the reason for multiple on Borg vessels. Whatever goes on in a transwarp coil, it seems too complex to simply replicate. So what about its use from Starfleet? Well, ever since they became aware of the technology, they have been looking into it, as stated, but it has several limiting factors. The first is that as of Voyager's return, Starfleet has yet to replicate multiple elements of the network, but this is only gated behind time, as the Federation will eventually solve most problems it is confronted with. The biggest issue is its reliance on a network of gates, manifolds and hubs to easily allow access to transwarp. As mentioned, spontaneously trying to create a corridor without these assets is a no-go, so firstly an extensive infrastructure needs to be established quadrant-wide. It's also a very energy-intensive method of travelling, as the Delta Flyer has to transfer life support to maintain the shielding necessary to remain in the Transwarp conduits. Again, not levels beyond Starfleet's capabilities, but still a taxing amount. The Transwarp hubs themselves seem to orbit a stellar object of some description, perhaps using it as a power source, so there seems to be a great deal of energy needed to maintain the network. Both of these issues are not insurmountable for the Federation, but the technology has its limits. While Transwarp provides hyperfast travel across established areas of space, charting into the unknown will have to be done without its aid, as I doubt you could create the necessary components of a network in an area you haven't visited yet. So you'd have to go there conventionally, create Transwarp links, sync them into subspace, and then you may be able to connect the new hyperspace lanes, Transwarp conduits, to the rest of the network. It's basically a video game's fast travel. You've already been here once, so would you like to go there again in a fraction of the time? I'm going to turn to Star Trek Online again to see how Starfleet could adapt this technology, and by 2399 they'd begun honest experimentation with replicating Transwarp gates, a sort of standalone hub with only one entrance. Over the next decade or so, they managed to link several of these together, and by 2409 several major Federation outposts were linked together with this method, allowing for travel times of minutes between certain points. The network is still fledgling in its design and nowhere near the complexity of Borg levels, who have had centuries to gradually expand their corridors. But it's a practical start and something the Federation can incrementally develop with time. Of course, they could just hijack the Borg's network again, but that all comes with its own series of risks, most of which are stabby tubules and menacing music. So that's how I see Transwarp corridors being implemented in Star Trek's future. It also provides a certain amount of leeway for writers to explain vast travel distances in minutes that otherwise didn't add up, if used correctly. We need to get to the Vulcan system from Cardassia? Instead of weeks of travel, let's just say they went to the DS9 junction and then warped from Sol. Need to travel for days for tension's sake? They're in unexplored space, or no gates in the area, or the network is offline because we're still learning. This is how I hope it gets implemented in the future, as it is a method of travel that Starfleet cannot afford to shelve, or it risks being superseded by other powers. Thanks for watching this video on the Transwarp corridors of the Borg. Until the next one, I've been Rick. Thanks again, and goodbye.